owner with her husband Ian of Brim and Associates. They're a CPA firm out of Springfield, Virginia. They have done a QuickBooks training for us in the past. That was in May of 2018 when we had our very first kind of admin ops training, 2-day training in Stanton a few years ago. So they did some QuickBooks training for us then. And ever since then, they've been assisting districts, especially on the eastern side of the state, with some as needed QuickBooks help. So they hopefully have a pretty good understanding of how districts have been operating, but every district is unique. So it always is about more challenges when you try to put together a more broader reaching training. So I'm gonna just kind of turn it over to Justine and her team and let them get started on the training. As you guys have questions, be sure to type them in the chat box, and we'll find some time to pause every now and again and try to keep up with those questions. So otherwise, I'm just gonna turn it back over to the administration and let Justine keep going.
And real quick, just before Justine starts, I think everyone came in without being on mute. So everyone, please be sure to mute. Zoom is being weird today, but yeah, if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Thank you, Blair, for the introduction. I'm just here with my colleague, Mary Ann. I do want to be up front and let you all know that we're both a little bit under the weather. So if we go silent for a moment, please excuse us. We're just muting briefly. So today we are going to do our first beginner QuickBooks training of our 4 summer training sessions. Today we're really going to start kind of back to the basics with QuickBooks. We're going to tackle talking about the chart of accounts, the use of classes, doing bank reconciliations, showing you some reports in QuickBooks, and tackling some common problems on other QuickBooks topics. We'll have time at the end for questions, but please don't hesitate to ask questions as we go along as well. So we're going to do as much as we can today as an actual live demonstration within QuickBooks, since this is being recorded, so you all can go back to it and see exactly what we've done instead of relying on screenshots. Today we are going to be working in QuickBooks 2021, which is currently the most recent version of QuickBooks that's available. We are working in the accountant's version of QuickBooks, which gives us all of the features of the highest version of QuickBooks. I do know some districts are working in the Pro version, which may not have all of the same features. For example, I know that version only allows you to see the most recent bank reconciliation if it hasn't been physically printed. The other versions of QuickBooks allow you to go back and see more historic bank reconciliation. So first, we're going to just take a look at chart of accounts. What we're doing is we are working in a dummy file that I created back when we did our first training in May of 2019 to do for screenshots and things like that for that training. So this is really a very bare bones chart of accounts, but it's here so that we can manipulate it, add additional accounts if anybody wants to see how a certain type of account would get added, and just go through this process. So it's not going to have everything that all of your district files are going to have in it, but the types of accounts should be similar. So at the top of our chart of accounts, QuickBooks automatically puts your bank accounts at the top. It orders based on first the balance sheet, assets, liabilities, and equity, and then the profit and loss with your income and expenses. So it puts bank at the top, then your fixed assets, any other assets, then it puts in your liabilities and your equity. then your income, which is going to be obviously all of the inflows that are coming, and your expenses for all of your outflows. At any time, you're able to add a new account. You can just right-click and click New and choose what kind of account this is going to be.
Hey, Justine, can I interrupt you for a second? I'm sorry, but
Of course.
someone has asked, is there any way to enlarge your share screen? Are you
My
at?
QuickBooks is at full screen.
It is? Okay.
Hmm.
That's okay.
And
Thank
I
you.
enlarged. That came through right at the time that I made chart of accounts full screen. So I'm hoping that resolve the problem that we were having on that end. Or is it something, Sheila, are you able to see it?
Yeah, it's just that that's really tiny, the print. So that's why I was asking.
Let me see if I can do anything on here too.
Under view options, you can enlarge the view up at the top. Up at the top of the Zoom screen, not the QuickBooks screen.
I was just trying to enlarge it on my computer altogether here. Let me see.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
So if we needed to add another income account, for example, for cost share 2022, we could click new and income. We would click next and give it an account name. And in this case, it's a sub account of our cost share funds account. And I switched that around. And if we click save and close, then we have a new account here in our chart of accounts. If, for example, we know that we have an account that we're no longer going to need, we've used all of our 2019 funds, we don't need this account anymore, we can make it inactive. It will no longer allow us to record new items to the account, but it will still show in reports from where it has been used in the past. So structuring your chart of accounts is really important to make sure that your reports contain information that is useful when you are reporting to your board, doing your attachment E, and any of the other reporting requirements you may have. Sub-accounts can be useful, for example, like in these cost share fund accounts, so that they're all under one umbrella. Where they get a little iffy sometimes is when they get used in the balance sheet side of things, because it sometimes tries to double count things. And when they get, especially if it's a bank account that's being used as an account, if something is moved after it's been reconciled, that then creates a reconciliation discrepancy going forward.
Can you think of a time, Justine, when it's important that they use sub-accounts for bank accounts, or should we just avoid that altogether?
I would personally suggest not using sub-accounts for bank accounts. I know there are a couple of districts who do that, and because it's already established, it's probably more complicated to try to separate that unless they create an entirely new bank account for those funds that they're tracking separately using that sub-account. And that may not be worth the administrative hassle for them. And something else that I know some of the districts choose to do is to utilize the charts and structure it so that it matches your attachment E. It's also possible to do this with classes, which is something that we're going to discuss. So they're both two very good options for how to categorize your information. So, for example,
County
you will see
Extension,
that
this
we
is
do have
Berkeley.
the cost share funds with
Okay, how are you?
different cost share years that are going to match those lines that are on your attachment E. On the other side of things, we do it with classes. We could do it with just the cost share funds account and have the classes for the different funding years so that you could get the same information just in a different format. So it varies on the way that your board is accustomed to seeing your reports and the way that they desire to see them. So those are both very viable ways of doing it. Not all versions of QuickBooks do support classes, so that is likely why some of the districts do this with using their chart of accounts as opposed to using classes. And something that we personally do with all of our clients is we have an account on their books that is called Ask My Account. So if they're in their own bookkeeping, they have a place to put the transactions that they don't know for certain where to classify. As we are doing these retainer hours where each district has the opportunity to work with us one-on-one, if you're encountering any transactions that you're not sure how to classify or have questions about, always put them to an account like this, and when we work together, we can work with you on those transactions. That way they're all in one place where you can easily find them if you do have questions about something and how to classify it. Did anybody have any questions about chart of accounts? Okay. If there are no questions, we will move on to classes. So classes are found as our chart of accounts under the list menu. So when you go to your list menu, the first item is your chart of accounts because that is the primary list in QuickBooks. That's what everything else revolves around. Then we have our class list. In this case, as you'll see, it has not been fleshed out since we did our original training. We had one for cost share 2018, one for cost share 2019, and one for operations. So if we want to add additional classes for these other years that have happened since then, I can go in and add 21, and 22. Something else you can do is you can also have subclasses, just like you can have sub-accounts. So if I wanted to have just a cost share class, I can do that, and I can go into these other classes, and I can edit them and make it a subclass. Then when you run your reports, you will get subtotals for each year and a total for all of the cost share activities. So this is a great way for districts that do have a lot of activity to be able to make these classes that are specific to your fiscal year and run your reports using the classes as opposed to making a new account in your chart of accounts for each item that you're tracking by fiscal year. That way, you're not, when you're recording these transactions, having to make sure that you hit the right account. You just have to focus on hitting the right class as long as you're, so if you had multiple expense accounts with the same name and the only difference was the fiscal year, it's a lot easier to accidentally hit that to the wrong account. Bill, I see your question about master QuickBooks. They are all local QuickBooks desktop files maintained by the districts individually. The districts set up their own QuickBooks files, and the majority of the districts, I believe, do all of their bookkeeping internally. So our personal recommendation is if you are running a version of QuickBooks that allows classes and has that feature, that is the most beneficial way to categorize your transactions. QuickBooks will require you to give all transactions a class. So a lot of our clients who use classes, they end up with a class that is general or other or admin, just kind of depending on how their terminology is. That's the catch-all for anything that isn't going to a specific project. This enables you to be able to run reports that are run on a class basis that are going to be able to tie to your attachment E. And the same for the expenses. So the expenses get the class assigned to them, reporting them, and so you can properly track your expenditures by category for your attachment E as well. Are any of the districts currently using classes? I know of at least one I've worked with that is. Has anybody had any issues with using classes in the past, or has it been a fairly streamlined process for you? Elizabeth, we would be very happy to talk to you about classes if that's something you're interested in using your retainer hours for, making that transition. Right now is a really great time to be changing something if you are interested in doing so, because we're right here at the beginning of a new fiscal year. You've only gotten through July, so if we're going to change something, the number of transactions that might need to be changed is much smaller than if we were talking about this a few months from now. So if there is anything we talk about today that you would like to implement, this would be probably the prime time to go ahead and tackle that.
And Sarah,
I'm
sorry. Let me mute mine. I did. Okay. Sarah.
Oh, it's coming through twice. Sorry for the feedback. We'll address how to reach out to them at the end.
Wendy, can you give me a little additional clarity of what you mean by list? Do you mean chart of accounts or something else that you're utilizing?
Yeah, why would it be more beneficial to use classes rather than chart of accounts or the lists?
Using classes generally streamlines the experience for a lot of people who are using QuickBooks because the chart of accounts can become rather cumbersome as you're continuously adding new accounts for each fiscal year, and it makes it more prone to errors in data entry, whereas your classes will be minimal because if you have multiple expenses that you're tracking based on your cost share, for example, you would have one class for each year as opposed to having one account for each account type for each year. And when we go to doing reports, it is much easier to look at it in the reports. When we run a report that is sorted by class, it will give you totals and subtotals on those class transactions instead of, for example, having all of your rent expense, just to pick a random expense account, with its different sub-accounts on there. Instead, you'll see it for each class, which is more in line with how your attachment E is formatted. And Marta, I would create a class for every dedicated fund. That's going to help alleviate some of the problems with categorizing things when they are being sorted for your attachment E. And with classes, it is by default going to want you to put a class on every transaction. It usually gives you a nice error message, just like the error message it likes to give if you're trying to make a change to something that's more than 90 days in the past. But you are still technically able to post without a class. This may create issues on running reports if you're not running reports that show your unclassified transactions. So we do suggest that if you are going to use classes, you just do make sure putting a class on every transaction and on every line where it's an option. And if you have had transactions where you've been using classes and the class did not get entered, you can track those down on a report that is run by class by looking at what is considered to be unclassified. I recently worked with a district who did send me over a couple of reports. One was a P&L bus, and one was just a general P&L by quarter. And we had some discrepancies on the amounts because not everything had been classified. Once we realized that, that helped clear everything up. It was a memorized report, which is another topic we're going to tackle. And because it was memorized, we just weren't realizing that it was excluding that category. So, as I said, we really do think classes are a very valuable tool. It's just making sure that they are being utilized correctly. Were there any other questions about classes? Okay. Next, we are going to talk about bank reconciliations. I'm sure that everyone here is reconciling their bank accounts each month as they get their statements in. This is important to make sure that all of your deposits are posting, all of your checks are clearing the account, and that everything is being recorded correctly into QuickBooks. I am, seeing as this is a fixed account, I am just going to make up an arbitrary amount here. And here is our lovely, this transaction is more than 90 days in the past message. Yes, I do want to make changes. So here is the bank reconciliation screen. One of the great features on this screen is the ability to hide transactions after the statement's end date. That way you are not seeing anything that is from a time period that does not apply to your reconciliation. That helps remove any errors on reconciling something that may have been from the same amount but from a different date, especially if you have vendors that you are paying the same amount on a regular basis, rent expense or something else that's recurring and consistent. If you're lucky and everything clears in the month that it occurred, you can hit mark all and mark all your checks, all your deposits, and theoretically your difference would be zero. I just made up a number, so I have a much bigger difference. You do not want to reconcile until your difference is zero. If you reconcile without it being a $0 difference, you will get this lovely message that there is a reconciliation discrepancy between your statement and the transactions you selected. You do not want to ever tell it that you are making an adjustment. This leads to a lifetime of issues trying to correct reconciliation issues. Because it will record something to your bank account, expense account, to just make it work. And with what you're doing, that is not something you ever want to do. We don't want to make something work. Within reason. If I know there are some historical issues with payroll and pennies and those sorts of things that basically we have to make work sometimes. But if you have a substantial reconciliation discrepancy, there's something going on. If there's any reconciliation discrepancy, there's probably an issue, something either didn't clear the bank for the right amount or did not get it entered into QuickBooks for the right amount. It's not uncommon for us to see checks clear the bank for a slightly different amount than they were actually written for. It might be a couple of cents, it might be a couple of dollars, but that's something that needs to be addressed with the bank so that that can be. I've also seen deposits go in for the wrong amount. Sometimes a couple of $1,000.
This is another time where it may be beneficial if you can't figure out why it's off to go ahead and on-click the hide transactions after the statement's end date. Potentially a date has been entered wrong, and that may help you to find that a little bit easier when you can see it, or if you know you're off by $1,100 and you know you made a deposit for $1,100 and can't quite figure out why it's not showing up. Sometimes without having to come all the way out of the reconciliation, if you on-hide those transactions, that you'll be able to see it. We do still want to change the date to make it accurate, and you should be able to do that from here. Click into that item and make that change at that point so that it will be correct and show on your screen.
So from your reconciliation screen, you can double click on an item and you can change the date and save that. QuickBooks loves to remember the last date of an item that you entered and continue to use that date and change it. So if you had entered a check dated August 1st and then went into record a deposit that you had made on 7/31, it may have retained that August 1st date, which would then cause it not to show when we have transactions. So that is something where if we're not reconciling, it may be good to open up that view so that you can see all the transactions just in case there was an error on the date. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify this balance so that it matches what I'm going to match to of 223,519.62. So if you ever do key in the wrong number from your bank statement, which happens as let me hit the plus right here. 223,519.62. You can go in here and you can modify that balance, because that could also be a reason why you're not reconciling. It could be that you miskeyed the bank balance. And you'll see here now that I have a 0. And I would hit reconcile now. And then it prompts me regarding my reconciliation report. It's best practices to go and print both reports. Personally, I generally print them to PDF. And if we need a paper copy, we'll do PDF and paper. That way, especially if you're in the version of QuickBooks that does not allow you to go back and view your prior month's reconciliations beyond 1 month, you have that record. I did work with a district recently where something changed. It went back like right to the beginning of the quarter and changed the bank reconciliation. So we had to go and undo a couple of months worth of bank recs, re-reconcile to get back where we needed to be. So having those reconciliations available is essential to make sure that you get the correct transactions reconciled without having to completely start from scratch with your statement.
Justine, can you undo no matter which version you have? Can you
Yeah.
go as far back as you need to?
Yes, you can undo, but you can't review the report to see what was sitting there cleared or uncleared at that time.
Also, if you have to undo, those saved previous reconciliations are very going forward, especially if it wasn't a very cut and dried reconciliation and you had to pick and choose items. If you have those and the mistake was 3 months ago, you're going to have to redo 3 reconciliations. If you can just make the correction on the farthest one back and then use the print you have for the future ones, that will make your time a little bit faster as well if you know what you need to leave on the screen.
Yeah, and that's what we did when I worked with that district recently. She had her report. She was able to tell me exactly which items were still outstanding when she had reconciled. It was a very quick process to fix that. Whereas if we'd had to go back to the actual statement, it would have taken a little bit longer to do. So I'm just going to display these reports. You have your reconciliation summary, which tells you what's cleared as far as your outflows, what's cleared as far as your inflows, and anything that's outstanding at the time that you're doing this reconciliation.
One thing that happens when you have things that are outstanding and they're dated to the month that you're in, those need to trigger a question for you. Sometimes we can make these reconciliations balanced, but there's still things left that shouldn't have been. If you have deposits that are showing up from May but you're in July, that needs to spark a question about what happened. Why didn't that clear the bank? Was it duplicated? Was there a bank mistake? So it's a little bit more than just reconciling and getting it to zero. It's also double checking to see what was left once you did reconcile and why was it left.
Yes. So deposits that aren't hitting the bank within a few days is a major concern and something that needs to be determined as to what's going on that's causing that to happen. Outflows can be a little harder because not everyone cashes their checks in a timely manner. You may have some people that you send payments to know they're going to sit there for 3 months before they cash them. And because you are seeing this on a regular basis, you probably have a pretty good idea as to who those culprits generally are. But if there's something that has been sitting for more than a couple of months, it's time to probably reach out to that person, see if they received the check, and encourage them to go ahead and make that deposit. So that you can go ahead and know that your books are going to be accurate, especially when you're coming to a quarter end. So this is the reconciliation summary. It just gives you a very high level total number of items, total amounts. It should basically match the top portion, should basically match your bank statement, where it gives you the summary generally at the top of your statement. Your starting balance, the number of inflows, the number of outflows, and your ending balance. Anything that's in the uncleared section is going to all be items that are in your books that have not gone through the point in time. Then there's also a reconciliation detail. It has the same summaries, but it shows you item by item what's gone through and what's outstanding. So the summary is it sounds just a very concise way to look at your reconciliation, and the detail is going to give you on the item by item basis to what has cleared and what is still outstanding. Did anyone have any questions at all about bank recommendations? anybody using the bank feeds option from your bank to directly download your transactions from your bank account, or is everyone manually entering all of your transactions? Okay. That is very much a consensus for manually. So with manual data entry is a little bit more of the possibility just for transpositional errors and just things getting miskeyed. It happens. So that can be a cause for reconciliation discrepancies. I mean, even with the bank downloads, the times where it is not perfect as to it might skip a transaction. So they both definitely have their pros and cons. But knowing that everyone is doing well definitely is a good piece of knowledge for us to have as we help you with any issues that you may have. If anyone's interested in doing a bank download, that is something that we can show you how to do on a district by district basis if you're interested. But if you're content doing manual entry and you don't have a large number of transactions that you're dealing with on a monthly basis, then there probably isn't any reason to change the way that you have been doing it and are accustomed to it. The nice thing, however, about doing the bank downloads is that you are able to match your transactions. So if I write a check for my rent and I record it in QuickBooks manually, then when I go and I download those bank transactions, I will be able to indicate that it is a match to the checks that I had recorded, and it will mark as reconciled. When you go in to reconcile your bank account, the box will already be checked for that particular transaction. So it does help catch things that are outstanding, but it does have times that so Heather, it really depends on how you're doing things. Some of our clients enter every transaction manually still and then reconcile in the bank download. Other clients only enter in the checks that they write out of QuickBooks into QuickBooks, and then everything else comes from the download. It really just depends on how their workflow goes. If most outflows are checks, then you're probably going to be entering them all into QuickBooks as your bank register, basically. The deposits maybe not as much being entered in advance. So it really just depends what you prefer for your workflow.
I would say that the most mistakes that we see from people who use the download feature, which we use here at the office a lot, the download feature. However, one of the mistakes we do see is if you're not careful on picking your dates. If you use yesterday's date, but there were still pended items, if your bank allows pended items to backdate, in essence, or date to the day that the transaction took place, you may miss those items on a download. So you do have to be careful to choose dates that make sense for the way your bank handles things. It's not always good to use today's date when you use the download, because if something does download from today, but not everything, the next time you look, you'd think you'd already done it through today, and there may be missing transactions. And that's what we see more than anything. Also, there's a couple of banks, if you repeat a transaction multiple times for whatever reason on the download, it doesn't like to bring them over. So there are definitely cautions with direct downloading. Sometimes, like Justine said, the advantage though is that if you've missed a transaction, you're not waiting until the end of the month to find that out. When you do your reconciliation, you would potentially have caught it much sooner. So that there are advantages and disadvantages. Mostly we know what most of you are doing, because that does help how we lead you through a process.
Because if we know that things are all just being manually keyed in, that is the way that we will default to presenting anything that we do within QuickBooks. That just makes it more streamlined so that we're all on the same page. So now what we are going to do is we are going to shift into talking about reports in QuickBooks. This is where QuickBooks really has an opportunity to shine, is in the reporting features that are available to you and the ways that you can manipulate these reports to get the data that you need and the data that you want to be able to see. So we're just going to work our way down the reports menu, hitting the reports that we think are the most beneficial. The first that we're going to look at is a profit and loss standard. This is going to be just your basic inflows and outflows. So I'm going to pick last fiscal year, and this is going to show you the transactions that we've put in this QuickBooks file for July 2020 through June 2021. Obviously, on your end, there's going to be a lot more accounts, but this is just a very basic illustration. You then have the ability to customize this report, and you can change how it displays various things. I can tell it that I want to see this report by quarter, for example. And when I click OK, instead of just showing me the totals, it is now showing me my P&L for each quarter. So these total inflows and outflows for each quarter should theoretically tie with each of your quarters on your attachment E. So being able to take this report and have it show you each of your 4 quarters and your total, it should match all 4 of your tabs, well, all 5 of your tabs on your attachment E for that fiscal year. You also have the ability, so if I want to change this back to quarter only so we don't end up with a whole lot of columns here, you can do comparative reports. So in this case, I want to see compared to the previous year, and I'm going to look at dollar change, average change, and we're going to see if I have anything in there for that fiscal year. I do have just a little bit. So, but you will see here the dollar amounts that they're different from each year and the percentages that are different from each year. So this can be really helpful when you're trying to look at performance from year to year. And when we talk about budgeting, this can be very useful as well. It gives us a very easy and accurate way to compare the performance from year to year and make sure that things are meeting your targets, especially where your expenses are concerned, because obviously one of the things that's important is to keep your expenses at your budgeted level and not be exceeding your budgeted expenses. So I am going to close this profit and loss. When I do this, it is going to ask me if I want to memorize this report. So this is a topic that we will tackle later. But this is an option in QuickBooks for it to retain reports when you have made adjustments to the way that they present. There is also the profit and loss detail. This one isn't run as commonly that we encounter, but it will show you each transaction that makes up each account during the time period of that report. And then you'll see profit and loss year-to-date comparison. It's going to be somewhat similar to that last report I just showed you that had the prior year, current year, and then it also had the percentage and dollar changes. This one does not default to showing those calculations. It just shows the basic amount. And I don't know why it's actually showing both of them at the same time period. So profit and loss by job is probably not going to be applicable for any of the districts. Job tracking probably isn't anything that anyone is doing. But then we get into profit and loss by class. You'll see here that we have some things that actually, I'm going to move the classification on this transaction. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to double click, and it will show me everything in that account. I'll find the transaction that I want to change. And I'm going to change the class on this, and I am going to move it to cost share 21, save and close. Yes, I know this is more than 90 days because these are my arbitrary dates. And then I'm going to get a message that the report needs to be refreshed. If you go in and change a transaction that is showing on your report, when you go back to that report, it is going to tell you that it needs to refresh the report to show you the updated data. And now there's no transactions on that report after I move that one. And as I refresh this report, you will see that this transaction is now under my cost share 21 within the cost share main class. And then we have our total cost share. So if I had transactions that were in multiple cost share classes, I would have multiple columns that would sum together in this total cost share column. Then you'll see here, these transactions are showing unclassified. That means when they were entered, they weren't given a class. And because we are wanting to classify all of our transactions to make this report accurate, I'm going to update this one as well. Move these expenses as well. And so it's a very quick process to go in and make these changes. You just double click on the transaction you want to change. You put the class in the class box, and that takes care of making that change once you hit save and close. So now you'll see I don't have that unclassified column anymore because everything has a class. So if you set up classes for each of your funds, you would be able to run this report for your attachment E and be able to see your revenue and your expenditures for each of those classes and each of those fund types. And those amounts should be the amounts that you are filling in on the columns under the attachment E that you are able to type in. Because as we all know, you get your beginning balance rolls from either your prior year or your prior quarter, and you can't make any changes to that column. You can do your transfers in and out, and then you can do your inflows and outflows, and it automatically calculates your ending balance for you. If there's a scenario where if you have other income sources, I know some districts rent equipment, some districts sell rain barrels. There are some other activities that go on that do generate income. And if you're tracking your customers, you can run these income by customer summaries. Mine's probably really not going to have anything. Let's see. Yeah, we didn't give anybody any names. You can run those to track who is getting the most income into those services. We do also have the expenses by vendor summary and expenses by vendor detail. So you can go in and you can see where you're spending the most money. If it's Office Max or Staples, which vendors have the highest outflows if that's something you need to see for some reason. But the next biggest you'll be running the most is going to be your balance sheet. So, and on the vendor side, that is important for when you issue 1099s in January. I know that one's kind of a little tricky since it's on a different cycle than your fiscal year. It kind of throws you for a loop because it's not part of your normal year end. It's kind of mid-year instead. So that does help you determine who you may need to send payments to that you may have paid more than $600 during the calendar year. For your balance sheet, so that is going to show you as of the date you run it for, how much money is in your bank accounts, your total assets, total lease, and your total equity, your net assets. Where this really does come in helpful is if we do run a previous year comparison, or we actually do this by quarters and do previous period instead. Let's see. Yeah, I overdid that one. Too many checkboxes. Let's do it on this one. I'm going to do for just 1 quarter. I run it for just 1 quarter and I do a comparison to the previous period. This is going to help me for my change in assets and liabilities on my attachment E. The changes to your bank account are already incorporated in the inflows and outflows on your attachment E. So it's the other items, your credit card, any payroll liabilities, or if you have any other asset changes. I do, okay, Blair, I see that. So in this case, with my books, it's not gonna change anything when I to cash basis because I'm not doing anything with accounts payable or accounts receivable. That's really where a lot of the difference between accrual and cash comes in. So I did just switch it over just for purposes of illustration, but things like your payroll liabilities and your credit card liabilities are still going to show on your cash basis balance sheet. Excuse me. So those are going to be the main things that most districts are going to be looking at when you're looking at your changes in assets and liabilities for your attachment E. So if I had a difference in my credit card here, say it went up $1,000, that would be the number that I'm gonna put on that line, and the amounts that are in your bank account aren't going to change that. Those aren't going to be incorporated because you're already taking care of that change when you're recording those transactions. So something that can be done, you can actually build your own report to memorize that is going to be for your change in liabilities and assets for the attachment E, where you can actually go in and tell it what accounts you want to see. And if I tell it I want to see multiple accounts, and I'm going to select all, but I'm going to undo my bank accounts. And when I click OK here, it now is only going to show me changes to accounts that I left selected. Okay, so I'm going to go in and further modify it, and I'm going to unselect my equity accounts as well. It is still going to show me the change to net income, which is going to be the amount that cash changed by, so that's a number that you can disregard. But the changes that you would see here in total assets and here in total liabilities are going to be what goes on your attachment E. So if you have changes on both, you'll net them against each other. If your assets went up by $2,000 and your liabilities went up by $1,000, that nets to a $1,000 change. So that would be what you would end up putting on your attachment E. And then your overall totals would be at the bottom to your balance sheet. So if we were to generate a report along these lines that we want to be able to go back to, we can click the Memorize button at the top. And you can name that you would like to give it. Sorry, I do not normally type directly on my laptop. Types a bit differently than the computer keyboard. And in this case, I have groups that I've created in my reports. And I already have a group for attachment E report. So I would put this in here. And then next quarter, when I need this data again, I would be able to update the date and be able to see exactly what amounts I need to be putting on the attachment E to account for the changes in those balances. So working with QuickBooks to figure out where you can harness its reporting power can really help simplify this. I know attachment E can be tricky. It takes a very different mindset than a lot of the other tasks that you need to do on a regular basis, and you're only doing it once a quarter. So it's something that you're doing consistently enough to really be able to just every time be able to sit down and knock it out. So if there are things you can build like this to help your process, it's worth investing the time up front, maybe a couple of hours to build these reports that will do hours upon hours in the long run when you're doing these attachments each quarter. So you'll see if I go back up here to my reports, right towards the top there is the Memorized Reports section. And it has the folders that I have created, the categories, where I could go in and see, this one's the change in liabilities report I just did, this one I had generated previously, that I had refined down a bit more because this one was specifically just liabilities, which is probably the most common, is that you're seeing the change in your liabilities more so than also seeing a change in assets. but because the attachment E is worded changing the assets and liabilities, it's probably worthwhile to go ahead and run it so that the assets are also included in case there is a swing in those balances that needs to be captured when you file attachment E. We are able to also run a balance sheet by class. That really isn't as useful in most reporting situations as the profit and loss by class. But when it's set up properly, it can be. However, if we're working in a QuickBooks file that has historically that was not classified, the balance sheet by class will not have everything properly classified. You'll have a lot more that's in the unclassified because it is based on the historic transactions. Under banking is where you would be able to go to view your previous bank reconciliations if you need to bring those up for any reason. If you are running the Pro version, you will only be able to see most recent reconciliation. All other versions of QuickBooks Desktop allow you to see all of your historic reconciliations. If you are running your payroll in QuickBooks Payroll, I know that some districts do. The employees and payroll section is where you are able to run things like payroll summaries, to get details for that if you need to. I know I was working with one district recently where some payroll did get put to the wrong class when it was recorded, so they needed to go in and rectify those transactions before they completed their attachment E because it was not properly tying out. So while we aren't going to be delving into budgets in depth today, your budgets and forecasts, you have your budgeting reports. So you are able to pull your budget versus actual based on the budgets you have set up in QuickBooks. And it will show you on a month-by-month basis what your actual was, what your budget was, and then the amount and percentage that you were over or under budget. So as we get into delving into these budgets on Thursday, you'll have a better understanding of how these reports can help you with. There are also reports for any items that you're tracking. So for the districts that have equipment rentals, if you are tracking those specific items in here, you can see which items are listed in your books. You can also look at your payroll items, which is actually can be helpful if you're having some issues with your payroll tax forms for any reason. You'll be able to see that you have federal unemployment set up, state unemployment set up, your federal withholdings, and your FICA taxes to make sure that they're entered into QuickBooks correctly and at the right rates if you are using QuickBooks Payroll. But if at any point you do come across a report that you generate that you want to make sure that you and get back to, we do suggest that you memorize that report because you can always pull it back up and change the dates. The only caveat that I really have on that is when you're running a classified report, that you want to make sure that it does include your unclassified column. Because if we exclude that column and you have items that have not been classified, your total on your P&L by class will not match your total on your everyday P&L. And that's where things then get really confusing when you're trying to do your reports, when you're missing either income or expense items or both. So you just want to make sure that if you are filtering by class, that you are doing all classes. So while I've been focusing quite a bit on the attachment E, because that's a lot of what I have helped districts with in the past, you can generate reports and categories for memorized reports for any kind of reporting that you need to do for any reason. You can do this for the reports that the board may want to see, or any other reason that you are needing to generate reports. They can be memorized to make that process easier for you when you are doing these things on a regular basis. Did anyone have any questions about reports? Is there any sort of example that you would like to see on how they can be manipulated to show you a certain type of data that would be useful for what you need? Did anyone have any questions about any of the other topics that we've touched on? Today, we were really trying to focus on a lot of the more basic foundational topics so that we're all kind of starting on the same playing field for these trainings. On Thursday, we're going to go a little bit more in depth and really tackle budgets, setting up your budget, running those budget reports, and what we can do to help you utilize the budgeting in QuickBooks. So I know that there's probably a lot of questions about that in general, but that really is a topic that we will dig into on Thursday. Though if anyone does have any specifics on that they want to tackle, we'd be glad to take them so that we can work on incorporating them into the materials for Thursday if we can. So, Marta, for paying tax liabilities, you are running your payroll within QuickBooks, correct? So as you just noted, it looks like you can submit some of them via QuickBooks. A lot of them you can e-pay now. You may not be able to do your state retirement, but all of your tax agencies, you should be able to e-file and e-pay directly from your QuickBooks. I don't think my file is set up to really be able to, I don't have payroll turned on this file, but you are able to mark it as paid and record the check that you are using to pay those liabilities. And so you'll tell it about the check number and it will mark it as paid and no longer show it as being due or overdue in your payroll module. Heather, regarding the payroll liabilities, the pennies, I know those are a lingering issue, and that's something that we do have on our agenda for our advanced sessions. So we're going to put together some slides to help resolve that issue when we circle back around. I believe it's late September. And Sharon, with the dealer discount on sales taxes, what we generally do for our clients who pay sales taxes, we end up adjusting that out of the sales tax liability account and back into sales income or whatever income account is generating those sales taxes, because it's essentially a small amount of income that you get to retain for paying your sales tax on time. And so we do that via a journal entry, and journal entries are something that we're also going to be tackling in our advanced lessons. So we can circle back around to that specific journal entry as part of that. So with Blair's suggestion for the time for payroll, I'm thinking maybe we can do 30 minutes or so, one of the advanced lessons that are coming up, and we could make that after the general questions so that the districts that don't do their own payroll can sign off, and we can focus on that with the districts who do.
Justine, you literally read my mind.
As usual. We end up on the same wavelengths quite a bit. So that way it can be an efficient use of everyone's time, because payroll is a very boring and tedious topic, and it's even worse when you're not the one doing it. Yep, we don't want to bore you to tears, Kathy. It really can be, while QuickBooks is a very great platform, QuickBooks Payroll is not always the most user-friendly, but it is also nice to have everything in one place. So there are definitely pros and cons to QuickBooks for Payroll compared to using a third-party vendor. Sharon, I'd be really interested, if you don't mind at some point, if you don't mind sending me a copy of how you do it with your quick reports, just to get a different perspective compared to the districts that I have had the pleasure of working with in the past who have been doing it with their P&L. If it is something that possibly we can look into working with districts to determine which is the most beneficial for them to utilize. So I'm just going to pop back over to my Yeah, Rhonda, I'm going to put my email in the box here for you. It's also going to be at the end of the slides. There are some districts that I have been working with for the past 2 years or so since we did our original training in Stanton during the admin ops. And we have
I'm gonna turn the camera on you, okay?
been on and off since then,
Okay.
depending on what's needed.
I don't even have a computer on my computer.
So you can reach out either to myself or to Mary Ann, or send an email to both of us if you'd like to. We're both here to help answer questions. If right now, if it's any a little bit more complicated, it will end up being run through the retainer hours. If it's a nice, simple, easy QuickBooks question that we can tackle for you pretty quickly, we're not going to ding your retainer hours for that. We just want to make sure that this retainer process runs as smoothly as possible for all the districts because it is new to everyone involved.
So how those retainer hours are going to work more specifically, because I know that's a question on everybody's mind, is we want to give every district the opportunity to utilize their allotted retaining hours. So the way we have it booked right now, it looks like every district will have 2 hours of retainer hours available. But in order to give all districts an opportunity, not everybody's on the beginner advanced QuickBooks session today. We want to get through the advanced QuickBooks sessions before those retainer hours open to everyone. So those retainer hours will kick in September after the last QuickBooks training is held, and there'll be a lengthy email from the association with all the details on how to use that. Hold on to some of those questions, or if you have more specifics, like Justine said, if it's something that's really quick, they're happy to work with you on it. If it's something a little more complicated, those retainer hours won't kick in till September. Do keep that in mind. And there is more information coming out about the retainer hours after the final QuickBooks training is completed. But like we said, Justine mentioned, she and her team have been working with districts, on the side anyways. Hopefully they're always here to help.
Also, don't hesitate to ask any questions now as well, because it could be a question that someone else may have. And if you hold your questions for your retainer hours, I would just hate for you to use up some more general questions, use up your retainer hours for that when everyone else could benefit, and then it's just revisited. So we definitely have time. If anyone has any questions, please drop your questions in the chat box.
If you have something now, or if something comes up between now and when we're doing these advanced trainings that you have questions about, think that it could possibly benefit even one other district, don't hesitate to send it over, because we would be glad to incorporate it in what we're going to be tackling. because we really want to be doing things that are going to benefit the districts, and knowing what you struggle with and what you need help with are going to really allow us to be helpful and not just doing what we think might be helpful. Recreating a direct deposit payroll liability check from payroll service that was accented. That's a doozy. Sheila, are you doing a general ledger import from your payroll service?
No, you know how you get I always, when I run payroll and all of my checks are direct deposit for my employees. So I accidentally, because I was rushing and I accidentally deleted that check from the liability that payroll service creates through enhanced payroll. And when I recreated it, when I back up my QuickBooks file, I keep getting a error stating that it's a duplicate entry. And I was on with QuickBooks chat help because you can't call them anymore for over an hour today. And they just kept saying the same thing over and over. And I'm like, I've been going into webinar, I can't talk to you anymore.
That sadly may be one where it does have to be QuickBooks to resolve that, because it does sound more like a platform issue with the software, where it's one of those things where QuickBooks payroll can be a frustrating experience. When you chat, is it possible to request a call?
Yes, that is.
So that's probably the route I would go. From our experience, we've had much more success with the phone representatives and the chat representatives recently.
Also, know that you can request an escalation. So oftentimes I'll tell you, I almost never get help now when I have to call for clients at the support level. I almost always, if I get 5 minutes into the call and I don't think we're getting anywhere, I will ask them to escalate it. The escalation team, QuickBooks has gone through a hiring, kind of like everything else right now, I think it's hard to hire people. And so QuickBooks has grown also, and because they changed a lot of their options for payroll, they needed more staff. And I think they've got a lot of new people. And so if I usually can tell within the first 5 minutes if I'm going to get the answer that makes sense or not. I usually know the problem. It's not something we've done, that it's a platform problem. And those people can't fix that. It requires an escalation. So within 5 minutes, I'll ask for an escalation. And I will tell you, if you call QuickBooks, get the case number and get an escalation case number. If they tell you they don't have an escalation case number, ask for it to be emailed once it's been established. It will make your process a lot smoother.
So the case number and what else?
The escalation case number, they're two different numbers.
Okay.
And oftentimes the escalation case number ends up going to a back end team of the software designers, because and it sounds like in your case that's what it is. It's a platform issue. So an outside person is not going to be able to help you on a general call anyway.
Well, it's just that she had me delete it, and then she said, "Can you recreate it?" And I'm like, "Well, you just deleted it, and I don't have a copy of it."
Oh my goodness!
I was like, just forget it. I'll just do it myself. I have it printed out somewhere in my files, and I'm like, in my payroll files, I'm like, I'll just do it myself later, or I'll call them. I'll have them call me. That was the best. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, we couldn't be more helpful on that one, but that is one of the things that they kind of keep a tight grip on, is those payroll items. Terry, I see your comment about not calculating those amounts correctly. If you could possibly send me some information showing me how you have it set up in your system, what it's calculate versus what you're expecting it to calculate, I'd be more than happy to take a look at that, and that might be something that we can include on one of these advanced trainings. what kind of settings we might need to adjust or something like that to resolve that issue. Marta, for using classes to track dedicated funds. So if we are using classes and tracking the inflows and outflows for those funds, you will be able to run that P&L by class and be able to see all the money coming into those funds and all the money going out to those funds. So you have those line items so that you can easily just go back to those and utilize that for your reporting instead of having to manually track everything in Excel. Your ending balances, because you have a QuickBooks file that has a history that would be unclassified, running a classified balance sheet probably isn't going to work. So you may still want to just use an Excel sheet with just a simple inflows, outflows to make sure that that's matching what you're in your attachment E. But I think setting up classes could help streamline that process for you. So on our PowerPoint, you will see that there are some specific directions for doing some of the things with reports that we walked through earlier, especially the change in liabilities report, because we do know that that's kind of one of those sticking points that a lot of districts have with their attachment E. While it's not overly complicated most of the time, it just is a different mentality than everything else that's going on to that report. So it just kind of requires a shift in the thought process. So having that report to be able to help you with it can be yet another way to streamline things. And that's really our goal here, is to try to make things easier for you. It may seem overwhelming and a lot of work right now, but the end goal is to make it easier for you on a quarterly basis. It's just one of those things where you invest the time up front and you reap the rewards in the long run by saving a lot of time each quarter once this is established. This was an example P&L that we had in here. The settings for the change in liability report, if you want to go back and just look at the screenshots for how to set it up instead of having to watch the replay. Some additional information about classes, why they're beneficial. It's a summary of a lot of the things that we've discussed already. One thing that I didn't mention is I do know that a lot of the boards want to see a report that includes any of your outstanding checks. So this is the steps to going ahead and generating that as summarized report, so that you just need to run that report each time you're putting your package together for the board. So you just want to excuse me, under reports, if you go to previous reconciliation, you'll choose the detail report. You'll include transactions cleared plus any changes made. And then once it generates that report, you can go in and cut it. You'll change your date to the period of the package that you're submitting. And you'll change your filter so that cleared is no. So this will only show uncleared transactions. So your report only include checks written but not cleared and deposits entered and not cleared. So obviously with deposits, we only want to see deposits from a day or two before the statement end date sitting there, just because the bank hasn't processed them yet. And honestly, we'd like to see the same with checks, but as we discussed previously, we can't control when people cash their checks. So that way, the board knows what's really outstanding. And relating to outstanding checks, I know that something's always a little bit of a sticking point is voiding checks, especially when it crosses quarters. And that's another one of the items that we're going to be tackling in our advanced classes. And this is just the information regarding memorizing reports that we covered and the memorized group. So you can have as many groups as you want, name them whatever you want to name them. As I suggested here, it might make sense to have one for your board reports. So that's where you'd put the outstanding check report and then reports for your attachment E. So you'd have your P&L by class saved in there, probably your P&L by quarter saved in there as well. You just always want to do kind of a reality check when you're using memorized reports, especially when they're P&Ls, and just also run a regular P&L same time period and make sure that your total income, total expenses, and your net income are matching what you're seeing in the total on that memorized report so that you know that you're getting all of the data captured in that report. So once again, if there are any topics that anyone has that they would like to see us tackle in the next 3 sessions, or you think we might be able to help you with today, we do have a little bit longer that we can go ahead and answer some more questions. So currently our plans for the session this week that we still have on Thursday is going to be focused on budgeting. We're going to work on creating our budget in QuickBooks, reviewing the budget, and budget reporting. When we reconvene for our advanced trainings, we have quite a good number of advanced topics. We're going to have a number of journal entry types we're going to talk about, mileage adjustments, investment gains and losses, prior period adjustments that may need to happen, sales tax dealer discount, and the sales tax liabilities we added to the list. The pesky payroll pennies were already on the list. And we're going to have the 30 minutes of payroll that we were just talking about. We're going to focus on using your reports to do your attachment E, voiding checks from a prior period, and talking about 1099s. So, Sheila, your question about a treasurer's report. I may not be the one to illuminate that answer. I have not personally seen what the districts are turning in for a treasurer's report. I just know that there were some topics that I was previously asked about, like the uncleared tax report. So I don't know if someone from DCR or if one of the other districts can give you some guidance to what technically meets those qualifications. I wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhat on a board-by-board basis as to what they want to see, because I know I have been told by some districts that the board wants certain things in certain formats, and another district will tell me that their board wants it presented differently. But I'm sure that there's a certain amount that is standardized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully Blair can answer that because it's in the desktop procedures, and I called several different districts and I got several different answers.
Yeah, so Sheila, I was just getting ready to chime in. So a treasurer's report is kind of like a generic term for like the treasurer needs to be giving a report to the board. What that report
Okay.
includes, there are some specific kind of like minimum things that need to be presented to the board as part of the overall treasurer's report. That's like your to-date balance, your outstanding checks, things like that. That all added together creates your treasurer's report. Now, again, like Justine and you were just saying, every district does it a little differently based on what their directors like to see, what they feel like needs to be reported to their board. But there are those kind of like minimum requirements of your like outstanding check report, your budget to date report, things like that. Did that help?
You.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
it does. I just, my financials are 60 pages long every month because, because someone wants them done per account, not a whole profit and loss. It has to be per account. It's really ridiculous. And it's so much work. And so that's the end of my rant.
Sorry.
That definitely sounds like it is a rather tedious process. So it really is, like Blair said, your board will give you the parameters of what they want to see, but there are those standards. And I do know that like you're saying, your board wants things in one format, other districts, other formats that they want to see. And that's what makes a lot of this really tricky, is because I can give you great ideas all day long on how to simplify your processes, but if the board is not responsive to the changes, then it's really not going to be beneficial. And with every district having these differences, it makes it more complicated to go through and tackle things together, and determine how we can do things for the best for all districts. I mean, there's always going to be a certain amount of things that are different because you do have other programs that differ from district to district. But it would be nice if certain things could be more cohesive. I definitely agree with both Marta and Sheila, what you're saying about being able to approach the board and saying that these are the things that are being recommended by the CPA firm that the association is using for training. And that honestly, yes, a lot of the board members have no earthly idea what the financials really are, what they really mean. And they make it much more complicated than it needs to be because they think it needs to be complicated. And my goal, like I said, is to try to uncomplicate this process. We would like for you to be able to just pull your reports, be able to get your attachments done, get your board report done, and not have to worry about this person wants to see it this way, and then I have to turn in my attachment E that's formatted this way. So it really, I mean, we would be glad to, if there are board members that are willing, even if it's just one representative from each district, to sit down and listen to something that we can present that shows an example of this is the streamlined process that we would like to see the districts use, so that they can better operate and be able to get more assistance and more training so that everyone's on the same page and ultimately make things more, I mean, profitable is not really the right word in this situation, but
if nothing else,
Yeah.
it makes it certainly easier for staff. And yeah, that's definitely been a discussion point we've been having during our annual meeting planning sessions, during our admin ops committee, kind of like tossing around training ideas. We have had a lot of talk about doing a training specifically for treasurers and board members on how to read a QuickBooks report so that you guys don't have to keep doing an Excel spreadsheet based off of your QuickBooks report, because directors don't know what a QuickBooks report should look like. They still like the old Excel version and things like that. So we have talked about doing a training like specifically geared towards treasurers and directors so that they have a better understanding of how to read these reports and take some extra effort and work off of you guys as admin staff. And we do have a number of directors on this training today. I see quite a few names on here, so that's good to see. We certainly encourage that as much as possible, but a lot of this is so in the weeds of how to actually functionally use QuickBooks that it may not be as beneficial as how to read a report kind of training.
Right.
So that's something that definitely we continue to talk about with Justine and her team, and we continue to talk about when and how we're going to offer that kind of training. So I do suspect something to come out in the future for that kind of opportunity.
Because really, I would love to work with districts to get things a bit more standardized, and when a district has turnover, for the process for the new person that is taking over to be much better. In the past couple of years, I've worked with districts that have had a little bit of turnover, and every time the person who is newer is scrambling because it's just been done piecemeal despite best efforts. And yes, it was a better condition than it was the first time, but it still had certain things that had to be tackled and get back into shape. So if there was some sort of standardization, even if it's not completely, it would really be able to help the districts be more efficient, which I'm sure everyone would be pleased with, being able to spend less time on this and be able to have more time for other tasks that also need to happen. And not be ripping your head at the end of each quarter. That's interesting, Marta. I did not know that some other states have standardized charts. There's always going to be some differences just because there are different activities that some districts have. Like I mentioned earlier, I know some districts sell rails and some districts run equipment and things like that that would have some differing activities. But if we were to have kind of a basic illustration for here are your core chart of accounts, that could really help having everybody on the same page as far as kinds of things that every district is going to have. Sheila, on your question about credits on invoices, was there an overpayment or did they give you a credit for some reason?
Well, I have a vendor that I send, it's actually a reimbursement for a grant that we have. So we ask for reimbursement every quarter. of expenditures, and they always either round down or round up instead of paying the exact amount of the invoice, which is frustrating for me because then my directors are like, why is there a negative on the, the invoice for that on the balance sheet? So just, yeah. I wrote it off last time, but it's 17
mean,
cents. It's just sticking there,
I mean, that's probably what is going to be the easiest and less stressful way to tackle it. Because like it's just going to be rounding amounts. You're never going to have more than 50 cents in either direction, basically. So it's not really something that's worth taking a lot of time to try to fix. And just either writing it off or doing a journal entry to tackle it. I mean, your easiest way. At the end of the day, it's basically a wash because it's all just rounding. And they round up, they round down. It probably nets pretty close to zero in the long run. It's just frustrating when you're in between.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Did anyone else have any questions about any of the topics we tackled today or anything else? Anything else they want to see in the next 3 trainings? For example, if you have specific questions about budgeting that you'd like to see us address this week, or any additional advanced topics you'd like to see. Obviously, we do still have some time with gathering topic advanced classes that if you encounter something over the next 5 weeks or so, to just shoot us an email. We'll be glad to incorporate what we can. Yep, I do believe we have the mileage and personal use of vehicles on the docket for the advanced trainings. So if you're not following the chat screen, Marta is curious, not specifically a QuickBooks question, but how many district personal use of company vehicles? Is there anyone other than Sheila who has a concern? Which obviously if it's documented and it's allowed within the district's parameters, then as long as mileage is being tracked, then that is something where there is a calculation and gets included in the W-2, the employee pays taxes on it. As long as it is done properly, it's not a problem. So that is one of the topics that if there's another district, we can tackle it as a training topic. If not, Sheila, it's something we can probably discuss together fairly quickly at some point. Sue, commuting is technically considered by the IRS to be personal use. It is not considered to be business mileage. So if you do allow your employees to use the vehicle for their commute, then it does need to be included as part of their compensation. So that can be something, because we have multiple districts possibly, if your district is allowing it for a commute, then I can definitely wrap that into the training. I just want to make sure that these topics that we are covering are going to apply to more than just one district. And we do, Sheila, the investment gains and losses on here as well on our topics for the advanced classes. It's going to be one of the journal entries that we're going to do as an example, to make sure that everyone knows how to make those adjustments for those accounts.
We are getting some, questions kind of trickling in, as you guys can see. And, so as you guys think of stuff, drop them in the chat box. We've got a few more minutes, or feel free to email them to either myself or Shannon, and we can make sure that, we cover those in the next couple of trainings that we have coming up. And, we'll make sure that they're included in we're having lots of conversations with Justine as we prepare for the upcoming trainings to make sure we cover all the topics you guys want covered. So keep those kind of topics and stuff rolling in. Another future training idea for invoicing. Yeah.
Okay. We'll put that one in. We may even be able to loop that one in on this week. Squeeze that in along with the budget. So I did include my email address and Mary Ann's email address in a message in the chat. However, my email address is also located on this last line of the presentation. We have a nice, easy convention for our email addresses here. It is just our first names at brimcpas.com. So you can reach myself, Mary Ann's address here as well. We're easy to get to. If for some reason you're not getting a response, things are bouncing back for any reason, you can use info@brimcpas.com as well. That goes general mailbox. And our phone numbers here. What we do ask is that you just call and make an appointment if you do need any assistance. That way we can make sure that we're able to set aside a good amount of time to talk about whatever topic it is that you need help with, just in case there is something else going on. We don't want to have to rush through a phone conversation. And we do have the ability with various platforms and technology to be able to screen share to see your screen so that we can better assist with whatever the QuickBooks issue is at that point in time. It really makes a world of difference to be able to see what is actually going on in just the hypothetical.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Justine and Mary Ann, for your time today. And thanks to everybody who participated. I think we had a lot of good questions, come out of this. And we've got some good ideas for topics for the future trainings as well. So I know looking at future registration lists, we have quite a number of folks registered for the, again, for the training later this week, and even a number of folks registered for all 4 trainings thus far. So good way to go, guys. Thank you guys again for being here. Thanks for everyone's time. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact Justine and Mary Ann. You can also, pass questions through me as well. So thank you to everyone and have a great rest of your afternoon.